They say every marriage is a mystery. You never really know who you're walking down the aisle with.
When I married Mike, I felt like I got a good deal on a used car.
Susan thought she found the man of her dreams. But over the years, that man becomes every woman's nightmare.
Mike was very suspicious, and it was never really clear where that anger was coming from.
For nearly 20 years, Susan went to bed with the time bomb.
Mike valued money and things over human life.
So Susan wound up fighting for her life.
She was on her knees when he's striking her from above.
I could see in his eyes that he was here to kill me.
My name is Steve Sharippa. I grew up in a pretty rough neighborhood in Brooklyn, New York. I've seen good people turn bad and bad people turn worse. Some took contracts to carry out a hit. Some were victims of a hit. To hitmen, life and death is just part of the business. It's nothing personal.
September 6, 2006, Portland, Oregon. Susan Kuhnhausen is finishing a grueling shift in the ER. After 20 years, Susan is an expert nurse. It's her life that could use patching up. Her 17-year marriage has collapsed, and she's learning how to be single again. Learning how to live without her husband, Michael Kuhnhausen. But Michael has a different plan. He's hired a hitman to do away with his wife.
If I were dead, he wouldn't have to share anything. If I were dead, he would not have failed at a second marriage.
After Susan's untimely death, he figures on mourning all the way to the bank.
Call me old-fashioned, but I think murder is kind of a weird way to break up with somebody. Seriously, when you get up there and say, till death do us part, the last thing on most people's mind is arranging your spouse's demise. That's how Susan and Michael Kuhnhausen started out. They were married for 17 years, and for most of the time, they were a happy couple. What Susan didn't know was that Michael was damaged, and even worse, that he refused every chance to heal. So every night of her married life, Susan snuggled up to a time bomb.
So how did years of family life end up with a corpse in the Kuhnhausen's hall? To understand her husband's plot and how it came off the rails, the first thing to know is that Susan Kuhnhausen is tougher than she looks. To understand it all, we have to go back to 1988. Susan is working as an emergency room nurse. Her life is devoted to being a bright spot in the lives of people who are having a very bad day. But you don't last a week in the ER if there's no grit behind your smile.
One of the nice things about emergency nursing is there is a great deal of variety. You have to be able to make critical decisions in a very short space of time, and you have to trust that you're doing the right thing.
Susan is a veteran nurse. She seems to have a special way with all types, you know, the super sick, the super needy. She just has a really soft, good heart to take care of those types of patients.
I really feel that that's one of the biggest advantages, is that people are very appreciative of what we do for them.
All that caring can leave you longing for love when your shift is over. So at 33, Susan decides it's high time she starts looking for a little TLC of her own.
I had been focusing on work for a long time. I worked primarily night shifts. Mostly I was looking to go out and spend more time with guys again. I had gotten into a period in my life where I mostly hung out with my women friends, and that gets boring.
Susan wants to have it all. A great career and a loving partner. Like a lot of people looking for love, she takes out an ad in the local paper. Susan's looking to cast a wide net. But the trouble with trawling is you never know what you're going to drag up. The man of your dreams or the deadliest catch.
It said single white female, 33, overweight but not over life. If you're interested in a bright, funny woman who wants to explore the Northwest, then give me a call or answer my ad, something to that effect. I was nervous. I had not ever done anything at all like that.
The best man in Susan's net is Michael Kuhnhausen. He's no Hollywood heartthrob, but he is kind and attentive. In their love story, Michael is a diamond in the rough.
I don't want to say he looked like a biker, but just very kind of gruff looking. But after you get to know him and he gets to know you, then you get to see a different side.
My first impression of Mike was that he seemed like a pretty nice guy. He's a little ragged, kind of biker-looking kind of guy. You know how people, when they're dating, they're always on their best behavior anyway, you know, and they're always nice to the family and that kind of stuff.
It's not like Michael has no baggage, but Susan's professional specialty is patching up damaged people. Her whole life is devoted to turning dents and bruises into smiles and a good story. He's divorced, so what? A couple of kids? Hey, more people to love.
Mike was very soft-spoken. He was polite. He would laugh easily. I felt like I got a good deal on a used car. We talked for probably 150 hours over the course of a couple of weeks. We talked about what we wanted from life.
What it seems they want is each other. So in December 1988, just months after meeting, Susan and Michael get hitched. Susan's eyes are open. She believes she's getting a decent, honest man.
I felt that anybody who gets married is very brave, and anybody who is willing to get married a second time is doubly brave.
At first, things couldn't be better. The Kuhnhausens are poster children for love and second chances.
Things were good in their relationship. In spring and summer, we would look for butterflies. We were birders in the fall. We had taken a trip and had seen quite a bit of the Oregon coast and had a fairly good time.
After a few years of marriage, most couples settle into a routine. But Susan, she notices the man she married is changing.
I felt that he was guarded and that he had been hurt before, and he was concerned about being vulnerable and possibly being hurt again.
Something is clearly eating at Michael, and it's not good. He's becoming incredibly negative. He retreats from human contact, even with his wife.
So Susan sets out to do what she does best, help a wounded soul heal. She encourages her husband to get therapy, but Michael's not into talking about his problems. And anyway, he doesn't have a problem. The world does.
Michael's version of therapy is working on his sports collection. He's got thousands of baseball cards, signed photos, and jerseys, all stashed in the basement.
If he had money, he bought baseball cards that you might pay $15 for today. It's worth 15 cents tomorrow or 15,000 tomorrow, you know. To him, he thought that was money, but he just kind of kept all that hidden away.
In Mike's mind, his sports memorabilia collection was worth more than it actually was if you were trying to sell it.
Money's a big thing for Mike. He's terrified someone might take away things he owns. His collection, his house, it's all his. Even if Susan is paying most of the bills.
One thing about Mike is he always worked. But I don't believe Mike ever felt financially secure in our relationship because I brought more money into the home. He always scrutinized the accounts, so he would get anxious over small purchases that we could easily afford.
You'd think scoring a new job might brighten Michael's outlook. He lands one with a lot of responsibility. Problem is, it puts him in contact with a crowd not noted for their decency.
He was the head of maintenance for a chain of adult entertainment stores here in Portland. He went to more than one store, so he was kind of like an overseer.
Mike oversaw the hiring, firing, training of janitorial folks for the company, and that was never an issue for me. They paid good wages, they paid benefits, and he did a good job. As near as I know, it's my understanding that he was good at what he did. I don't know for certain.
Michael might have started out as a caring and decent husband. But the doors of a pawn shop are often portals into a whole nother world. The more time Michael spends with people coming and going to and from that world, the more his own colors get darker and darker.
Portland, Oregon, September 6, 2006. Susan Kuhnhausen is heading home after a long shift in the ER. She's planning a quiet night. Unfortunately for Susan, her estranged husband Michael is busy stage managing a surprise. He's stashing a hitman named Ed Haffey into her house. Haffey will be ready and waiting for her arrival.
A wise man once said, all marriages are happy. It's living together afterwards that causes the trouble. After 17 years of marriage, maybe Susan Kuhnhausen should have known there was something deeply wrong. Thinking the best of people isn't a crime, but it can be dangerous.
Even though the first decade of their marriage was smooth sailing, over time, storm clouds have been gathering. Michael's brooding gets worse. His outbursts turn violent. He's no longer the happy, caring man Susan married.
Mike was very fearful, very suspicious. He just was chronically angry. And it was never really clear where that anger was coming from.
I would probably say his negativity is the most marked thing that I could see had a big effect on Sue. If she and I decided to go to a movie, he would be grumbling about the fact that she spent money on the movie.
Probably about 7 years into the marriage, it became clear to me that he was not going to be able to control his periodic outbursts of anger, that he was anxious on a chronic, everyday basis, and there was not anything that I could do about that for him.
It's not that Susan hasn't been trying, but she's had to live through years of nasty spats. She's resigned to holding her tongue for fear of setting off his hair trigger.
Now, I know what you're thinking. Every story has at least two sides. Susan's got lots of friends, but no one has much to say about Michael. The problem is, Michael is fixated on things he owns and things he can control. Greedy, obsessive people, they're not such great company. Mike doesn't have many friends, but he sure has a lot of baseball cards.
By now, Susan's figured out one of the reasons Michael is disturbed. He's seen disturbing things. He's one of the 1.5 million Americans who fought the war in Vietnam. He says he went on long-range patrols. That's an assignment guaranteed to expose you to the worst war has to offer.
He never really talked about Vietnam. I've been around a lot of veterans. They either talk about it or they don't talk about it. He seemed to be one of those that didn't talk about it.
I know he probably saw some really horrible things, and I would imagine he couldn't come back from something like that unchanged.
Only one time did he really speak much about his experience. He said that they had been instructed to go into a village to kill some VC, but instead that there were children involved in the village. When I suggested that he might benefit from going to the vet center or connecting with the VA, he said no. He described it as putting all of that in a room and locking the doors.
Susan knows those doors can't stay locked. Hey, you can't really help someone that won't help themselves.
In my neighborhood, there were a lot of guys just a few years older than me who got sent to Vietnam. There was something different about them when they came back. I'm no psychologist, but I do know that post-traumatic stress is a powerful thing. It's a deep, dark well that takes a lot of help to escape. For a guy like him, Susan could have been a life raft. I mean, she's caring, strong, and has good insurance to boot. But he's in a whole other place. I mean, he's beginning to think she's the enemy.
Look, we've all got our baggage, but what he's got is radioactive. Over time, it mutates him from being a good and loving husband into a killer.
He always felt like that he didn't get a fair shake or a break in life, and that when things were not going well, that it was everyone else around him who had caused that to be for him. I think that he felt like he was losing again, that I was going to take advantage of him financially, the way he felt his first wife had.
The problem is way deeper than Mike feeling mistreated. Michael and Susan are supposed to be a team, but now he's hoarding more than just his precious card collection.
He was getting a bonus, I thought, at the end of every year for about $1,000. But I found out that, in fact, he had been getting $4,000 or $5,000 a year, but only telling me about $1,000. So my husband was hiding thousands of dollars from me every year.
Listen, I've known guys like Michael. We all have. He really believes he's always the victim. It's a way to blame the world for your own failures, and it excuses your bad behavior when you lash out at people close to you.
Mike's salting away quite a nest egg. It's the kind of cash that'll come in handy if your bad attitude turns violent. Eventually, Susan's had enough. To protect her own sanity, she tells Mike to get out.
I wanted him to go. I felt like I was doing the work of the marriage. I felt that I did the work of trying to make a relationship for us that would work, and he was not being a part of that. I wanted to be alone and have quiet and peace in my own home.
Michael finds himself discarded. Man, he can't deal with that. All of his pent-up rage, frustration, and feelings of persecution now have one focus. Susan, the woman who wants to take everything he has. She's the possession he can't control.
It's been 10 months since Susan kicked Michael out. She hoped it might be the jolt he needed to force a hard look in the mirror. But not Mike. He was bitter and angry before. But now, it's only gotten worse.
As bad as this all seems, you gotta remember, Susan didn't decide to spend her life with a monster. She married a nice guy who had problems he wouldn't deal with, and so they got worse and worse.
And the crowd Michael's been hanging out with, well, they greased the skids of his decline. One of his janitors at the adult video store is a guy named Ed Haffey. Ed and Mike have become buds.
Ed Haffey had been involved in a variety of different crimes stemming back almost 20 years. And when he got out of jail, he'd move between friends and friends just to get drugs. And when he owed people money, he'd move on.
Ed Haffey's biggest issue is badness. He is a bad, bad guy. Where do I start?
Drugs? Violence? Robbery? How about this? When his ex-girlfriend told the cops what he'd been up to, Haffey paid a guy to torture, kill her, and dump her body in the river. Like I said, a bad guy.
After his last stint behind bars, 10 years for having that girlfriend killed, Haffey adds to his problems by picking up a costly crack habit. So now, he's not only brutal and dangerous, he's also broke and desperate to keep his pipe full. Not many would consider Ed Haffey as friend material. Just out of prison for a violent crime, the guy is a piece of work. But Ed and Mike do have things in common.
Ed Haffey totally buys into the whole world is against me notion. In my experience, most lowlifes are dead certain their predicaments are the fault of just about anyone but themselves. If you ever needed proof that misery loves company, Exhibit A would be Mike and Ed.
Ed Haffey and Mike Kuhnhausen had a lot of similarities. You know, they were both in the military. They knew each other because they worked together. So there was a lot of common ties between the two.
Whether it's Haffey's influence or his own pathology, Michael gets nastier by the day.
I went to the parking garage after work one evening, and 2 tires on the passenger side of my Honda were flattened. And I thought, how weird, how could I have blown both tires? But when I limped over to the nearest gas station, the gentleman there said the air was let out of your tires. I never suspected that it was Mike, but retrospectively, maybe it was.
I know what you're thinking. What's a little vandalism between estranged spouses? The point is, Mike's made a turn. He's gone from being an angry, bitter, reclusive miser to something else. A guy who can actually cause harm. It's a bad turn. Susan notices. It scares her.
I remember one time Mike pressing Sue to go to the beach, but my first thought was, you're not going alone with him, are you?
Had he already been making plans for me to fall off of a cliff? You know, I don't know. I don't know.
So around this time, Susan detects a hit on her finances. She and Michael still have a joint account. Suddenly, he's withdrawing lots and lots of cash.
Now, Susan's been a hard worker all her life. I mean, she's no millionaire, but she's comfortable. The house is paid off, and so are the cars. She's got some savings, life insurance, and a nice pension fund.
He had begun taking money out of our accounts, but I had no clue. I changed my life insurance to my brother and my mother's name.
I think it was just, to keep some safety there, for herself, because she didn't really know. I don't think that she wanted to believe that anything could happen, but he had made several off-color remarks or made those staring looks at her.
Susan's a nurse, a healer, but the first thing ER professionals learn about is triage. You don't waste your time on the ones you can't help. It's clear to Susan that her marriage is dead. She tells Michael there's no point in resuscitation. She wants a divorce.
He told me early in our marriage he didn't want to be divorced again. When I told him that I was going to file for divorce, he said, "Wait, I need more time to get my head together." Now I know he needed more time to get the head together.
For Michael, he thinks his life can't get any worse. But like they say in Portland, into every life, lots of rain must fall.
He had lost his job, the job he had had for many years. Well, he seemed emotional.
We think that everything was kind of falling out from underneath him. And the only way to get back was to get some money so he can stand up on his own.
With no house, no job, and a wife who's had enough of his refusing to help himself, Michael Kuhnhausen is now forced to confront who's really responsible for everything going against him. You got it, Susan. But Mike's figured a way out. If Susan were out of the picture, he'd keep all his stuff and get a pile of money too.
Trouble is, deep down, Mike's a coward. He's not gonna kill Susan himself. He's gonna hire his friend. And he might be spineless, but he's not brainless. Mike knows he'll need an airtight alibi.
I think when Michael Kuhnhausen decided to solicit somebody for this, Ed Haffey had the background he was looking for. And when the opportunity came up, he'd been there before. He'd seen this before. This is something that wasn't new to him. It was just a matter of doing it.
In the summer of 2006, Susan's idea of splitting up is paying off for her. Her friends notice that she seems happier and more relaxed.
Sue did a lot better once Mike was out of the house. The removal of all that negativity just made a huge difference in her life. And I would describe Mike as just an unhappy, miserable person.
Luckily, Michael's misery buddy is right there with him. Ed Haffey also got the pawn shop pink slip. Angry, broke, and desperate as Michael is, it's nothing compared to Haffey's discomfort. Crackhead, remember? You need cash to feed those cravings.
Ed Haffey needed to survive. He needed money to survive. He needed ways to survive. He incurred debts amongst the people that he lived, owing them rent, owing them money for drugs, and it just continued to build and build and build. Michael Kuhnhausen approached Ed Haffey. They had discussed $50,000, so $25,000 up front. Ed Haffey believed that he could pay a lot of his debts right from the very beginning, get those out of the way, and then the $25,000 at the end would take care of Ed Haffey.
Let's do this, man.
Haffey's desperation is just what Mike needs. He figures if he can establish a good alibi, the cops will never connect him to her murder. He'll get the house, the pension money, and his sports collection. And 50 grand will go a long way to solving Haffey's problems, too.
Some of Haffey's friends actually said that he started to pay off some of his debts before this thing happened. $400 here, $500 here. His friends told us that Ed Haffey says, I've got a job to do, somebody wants somebody killed.
But as they think through their plan, Mike and Ed have one worry: Susan's brother, James. He and Susan are real close, and he's sure to put two and two together.
Mike and Haffey were watching me. I think he was trying to set me up, you know, to get me out of the picture. I don't know what his plan was, but I had been stalked by Haffey, I believe.
Collecting Susan's loot will be way more complicated with a suspicious brother around, so James could be in danger too.
Michael Kuhnhausen was once the man of Susan's dreams. He liked walks on the beach, candlelight dinners. He found a good woman and kept her happy for a long time. But that time is behind him. He took a bad turn and he kept going. What matters to him now is control. Control of his things, his money, his house. Killing Susan gets him all of that. His transformation from loving husband to homicidal monster is complete.
He did not want to split anything. I think he wanted everything. He wanted the house, his retirement. I think he just wanted everything for himself.
September 6th, 2006. The trap is set. Mike tells Haffey it's time to put the hammer down.
Ed Haffey believed if there was any kind of resistance, Ed Haffey could take Susan Kuhnhausen. We think that Michael took Haffey there, drove him there.
Susan never changed her alarm codes after she kicked Mike out, so it's easy for him to get in.
We shared an alarm code, the date of our anniversary, 12/10. There's a bypass alarm, so that when you're in, if you have pets and stuff, people can move about the house freely, but the house is still armed if someone tries to break in.
Ed Haffey has agreed to kill Susan for $50,000, and it's not going to be pretty. To keep things quick and quiet, he plans to beat her brains out with a claw hammer. No gunshots, no screaming stab victim. The weapon's unusual, unless, of course, you're totally confident that you're way more powerful than your victim.
All Mike's planning comes down to this. To the cops, it'll look like a burglary gone wrong. And he was well out of town when it happened.
I went to work. It was a regular shift for me. It was a fairly busy day.
Around 3 in the afternoon, Susan gets a strange call. It's Michael. He's just touching base.
And I said, what's going on? And he said, well, I've got to get away. I told him to relax, to have a good time, try and get some rest.
By the time Susan leaves work, Michael is checked into the motel at the beach. His alibi is all set up. As the sun sets, he waits for Ed Haffey's call to tell him that his wife is dead.
So I came home and turned off the alarm. And I had found a note from Micah in the mud porch, so I placed it here with my other things. And then I just headed out towards the front to get the mail. And after getting the mail, I returned in and kicked off my Birkenstocks and rounded the corner towards my room to get out of my working clothes. And when I got here, I noticed that the door was almost closed instead of open, and the room was very dark. When I pushed the door back and stepped forward, my attacker began to hit me in the head and face with the hammer.
Alone in her house with a desperate killer, Susan Kuhnhausen is fighting for her life. The Oregon coast is a great place to get away from it all. So on September 6, 2006, Michael Kuhnhausen comes here to establish that he was nowhere near Portland when his wife was murdered.
But Susan is not dead. Well, not yet anyway. And hitman Ed Haffey's confidence that a hammer would make killing her quick and quiet is proving to be a bit of a miscalculation.
When I saw in his eyes that he was here to kill me, I became enraged. What I did during the attack was, in me as a result of my nurse's training, I fought. And we were literally nose to nose, struggling over a hammer. And he said, "You're strong." But he was not afraid. He was surprised. So I began to bite him. I bit him on his arm, I bit him on his flank, I bit him on his thigh, and at one point when he was slightly turned, I bit him in his genitalia. My voice was gone. I became the weapon. I pushed him flat to the floor, and I got up on his backside, and I leaned forward, and I put my left arm under his neck, and I squeezed, and I said, "Tell me who sent you here, and I will call you an ambulance." I wanted him to be afraid, as terrified as I was, but he instead tried to flip me up off of his back. And that's when I leaned forward until he stopped moving. I wasn't sure whether he was unconscious or dead. But when he was still, I grabbed the hammer and I ran. Sorry, guys.
Susan's badly beaten, but incredibly, she has survived. Ed Haffey, he didn't. "You're strong," were his last words. Paramedics rush her to the hospital. She winds up a patient in her own ER.
I saw the ambulance, paramedics. I recognized both the paramedics because they had come in before. And the female paramedic looked at me and said, "She beat his ass." I will never forget those words. Susan was very visibly upset, crying, talking about over and over that she killed him. And just to see her suffering and how devastated she was.
They sent an officer to come and be with me. When I saw his face, the first thing I asked is he dead? And he said, "Yes, he is."
We knew from the very beginning that this was, if you will, a justifiable homicide, that somebody had just broke into her house, and she's the one that caused the death of this person.
The cops discovered the note left by Mike. It is a key part in establishing his alibi. Out on the coast, long after sunset, with no word from Haffey, Michael figures something's gone wrong.
When I got home, my phone was ringing, and mind you, this is 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, and I picked up the phone and it was Mike. And the hair just stood up on the back of my neck. He just started talking, but the first thing out of his mouth was, "What's going on? I've been at the beach for 3 days." It was just really odd. And it seemed kind of manic. He was just kind of saying, "I saw my house on the news. What's going on? Where's Sue? Nobody will tell me anything. I've called the hospital." And of course, I know that he's tried to call the hospital. I was just there, and they were purposefully not letting him know if she was there because, again, we just didn't really know what was going on. I think he was trying to put, his alibi out there.
The cops have no idea what happened or the history that makes Susan and her friends suspicious, but they get up to speed real fast.
They discover a backpack in the basement, and it breaks the case.
We went in the house after the detectives released it. The first thing I saw was actually the items that had been lined up to go out the door by whoever had been in there. But when I looked at what those things were, they were the sports cards and Mike's football jersey that was framed. All these things were only things that Mike coveted. Nobody else. And I knew right then that he was involved. I was standing there looking at the sports memorabilia, and right in front of me was the backpack. I mean, I knew that backpack did not belong there.
That backpack was at Haffey's, and in that backpack was some crucial evidence that we were able to tie to Ed Haffey and to Michael Kuhnhausen. We found a piece of paper in there that said, "Call Mike, need a letter." We immediately started putting 2 and 2 together with Ed Haffey and Mike Kuhnhausen.
So the cops are pretty sure Michael put Haffey up to it. Trouble is, the cops don't know where he is, or even, God forbid, if he's coming back to finish the job.
We learned shortly after that he purchased a gun before this incident. So we had to put in some kind of safety measures for Susan Kuhnhausen because she was still alive and a person of interest is still out there, possibly with a gun.
Eight days after Susan's attack, Michael is arrested without hurting himself or anyone else.
He tries to play the victim, says he's suicidal and that he wasn't involved, but no one buys it. The fact that his phone number was in Haffey's bag is enough to charge him with attempted murder and conspiracy to commit murder. Just before the trial, Michael folds, he pleads guilty.
I've hurt a lot of people in the last year, and I'm sorry. That's all I can say.
He'd been with Susan for many years, and he knew a lot about her, but I think the things that really mattered in this situation was that he didn't know that she was a fighter.
I think Michael only regrets that he's in jail and, that he's not free to, live his life the way he wants. I think that is his only regret.
So in the end, Michael is sentenced to 10 years. Susan, the healer, has to live with the fact that she killed a man. She had to divorce Michael. He fought for every penny, but in the end, she got to keep the house and her pension. Oh, and his precious collection. Mike hung on to that. Susan doesn't miss that stuff, but she does live in fear of the day that Michael gets out.
Money. His motivation was money. He wanted all the insurance, he wanted all the money, he wanted all the sports card. It was all about Mike. Mike wanted it all. But Mike couldn't get it all because Mike could not open up to accept anybody's care or love or anything like that.
I am absolutely concerned about his parole. I believe that as soon as he is free, I run the risk of murder or murder-suicide. I know with certainty that it's a terrible thing to take another person's life. I don't know that you ever get over having killed another human being. I've always said I don't take any pride in what I did, but I also feel no shame.
A failed rock star living a fantasy life and a masterpiece of deception. That's next week's Nothing Personal at the same time, Sunday at 9.